Hello, welcome. This is Pat O'Meara. I'm the chairman and CEO of Inveniam. As many of you guys know, we've been doing a series of webinars on tokenization of securities, and we're going to dive into multi-chain, cross-chain solutions. And we've got a fantastic panel here. We're going to give this a minute as more people join in. And again, I want to suggest that everybody there will be a mechanism for people to comment, and we'll be answering those questions later on in the webinar. But we're going to give everybody a minute to join in. And as we do this, I think we have people calling in from all over. We've got St. Louis, Minneapolis, Dallas, Chicago. Kyle, you're in Austin, is that right?
Dallas now, actually. Same with Bob.
Okay, gotcha. Dallas. And Quentin, where are you calling in from?
Calling in from Queens, New York.
Queens, New York, and I'm in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So we are heavily Midwest oriented today, right? So we got one outlier on the East Coast.
Greatly outnumbered.
Yeah, we got the whole Midwest covered. And so we're going to go ahead and begin, and we're going to go around with a few introductions if we can. Michael Creedon, why don't you give us a quick introduction of yourself and what you do?
Morning, Pat. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Mike Creedon. I'm the president of Inveniam Defi Devs. As you can tell by the name, we have a close relationship with Inveniam itself. And so as we'll be talking about this morning, our company is a technology company heavily involved in blockchain. We have a strong involvement in the Accumulate protocol, which we'll be talking a little bit about this morning. My background is in financial markets, but I moved into fintech a few years ago, and it's been a great journey. So thanks for having me.
You got it, and we'll be there's a couple people from DeFi Devs who are here, and we'll be meeting them as well. We'll learn more about what you're doing. But Dan, I'm going to go to you, brother. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm the founder and general partner of Ascend Venture Capital. We are investing at a Fund 3, and we're a thematic firm focused currently on the data-centric paradigm shift that implicates all industries right now. Every company in those industries needs to become a data company now to stay competitive. And in those predicate paradigm shifts, if you can find the companies that every company needs to work with, then you can generate VC type returns. So that strategy has run really well for us. So
wonderful, Dan. Thanks so much. Bob, I'm going to go to you, brother. Tell us, introduce yourself and tell us where you're calling in from.
Yes, Pat, thank you so much for the invitation to this. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm enjoying it. And so I'm Bob Foster. I'm the founder and president of Verso. Verso is a transaction management portal. It's a cloud-based portal running on Azure that basically helps ecosystems manage transactions between themselves, right? So it's the primary focus of what we do. We've been a partner of Accumulate for several months now, and we're really excited about what we're doing with Accumulate and how that supports our mission with Verso. So glad to be here. Thank you.
Fantastic. Hey, thanks so much. Good to have you. Christos, it's good to have you here, buddy. Why don't you give us kind of the 2-minute Christos story?
Christos Polyzois, good morning, everybody. I am the Deputy CTO for Intellectual Property and Innovation at Inveniam. So I deal with maintaining and expanding our very significant patent portfolio, 40 plus granted patents, 30 plus applications pending. That by itself can be a full-time job, but my background is in digital technologies, particularly distributed systems. So obviously this is very applicable to blockchain. And I have also taken a particular interest in the conceptual framing of the issues around distributed systems, particularly in the context of multiple blockchains and cross-blockchain transactions.
Great to have you, buddy. Thanks for joining us. Kyle, you're up, buddy. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Kyle Michelson. It's great to be here in this panel. I'm the VP of Technology for Defi Devs. I joined the team now about a year and a half ago. I'm focusing right now on technology and solutions, primarily in the IoT and supply chain space. And my background is actually as a scientist, most recently at UT Austin, where I worked on nanotechnology, sensors, and optics.
Kyle, great to have you. Thanks for being with us. And Quentin, great to see you, buddy. It's been too long since I've seen you. Give us a little bit of an update on yourself and tell us about kind of where you came from and what you're doing right now.
Yes, it's been too long, Pat. Thank you, and thank you for having me here. So Quentin Vidal, I'm Senior Product Manager at Defi Devs. Fun fact about me, I actually started at Inveniam as a product manager, and I loved what Defi Devs was doing with Accumulate so much that I politely asked to be transferred over to that team. I've been there ever since. So mainly my role as a product manager at Defi Devs revolves around overseeing and helping the development of ecosystem applications. So we're especially applications such as what Bob Foster at Verso is doing. We make sure that they have what they need, that they fully understand the full potential and functionality of Accumulate, and have the most optimal design approach when implementing.
Fantastic. And it's great to have all of you. And I think we want to take a minute really quick to define some terms, because we're going to be throwing out terms. Lots of people may or may not know these terms. Typically, these webinars are for people who are a little bit more in the weeds and know these terms, but let's make sure that we understand them. And Christos, I'm going to turn to you for a minute, right? Why don't you talk us through cross-chain, multi-chain? Why do you use a permission chain? Why do you use a permissionless chain? What's the value of them? Should a corporation use one chain or many chains, et cetera? But will you do a little bit of framing this conversation, take 2 or 3 minutes, as well as kind of explain these very basic concepts?
Okay, thanks, Pat. So let's start, first of all, by stating the obvious that we are dealing with more than one blockchain. And nobody sees this situation changing anytime in the near future. The joke is that standards, the good thing about standards is that you have so many, and if you don't like any of them, you can start your own. So it is very difficult to manage. We live in a free economy. Every blockchain claims to have its own advantages. So that situation will probably continue for a while. So terms like multi-chain emerge. So just as there are multiple languages, and the Esperanto did not take over the world, so we have English, French, German, Spanish, Chinese, and so on. Similarly, there are multiple blockchains. So when one refers to multi-chain capabilities, that is the capability to operate on multiple blockchains, very similarly to somebody being, let's say, bilingual, so that this morning I could be speaking, for example, in English, and later in the day, if I call up on the phone my parental family in Greece, I will be speaking in Greek. But different discussions and different content. I just have the capability to participate either in a discussion in English or in a discussion in Greek. Cross-chain the term is used when a particular transaction or a particular series of operations involves the simultaneous participation for the same purpose of 2 or more blockchains. So the equivalent there would be if there was somebody who spoke only Greek, I could be in the middle and I would need to be speaking in Greek to that person while at the same time speaking in English to our audience. And both participants will be participating in the same discussion. So that is when you may have one kind of token or asset on one blockchain, another on another blockchain, and you may want to exchange the two. Going back, yes, Pat, shall I continue with private and
well, let's just talk about that for a minute, right? I want to tease apart because the distinction of where in the same operation or in the same transaction or conversation, you might be using multiple chains. But there's also a mechanism that we need to understand of the difference between a bearer instrument and a non-bearer instrument,
yes,
right? Because that very much gets into the play, right? Because when you have a bearer instrument, crypto, right, that you have in a cross-chain functionality, if you lose control or in that cross-chain functionality, it's able, that is a mechanism or an attack vector to get a bearer instrument. The consequences are very high. But in a non-bearer instrument, cross-chain functionality in a single transaction where you can call back the token, or you can burn and mint a new one, right? Where you say, this was hacked, this person doesn't have a right to it, I'm going to burn it and mint a new one back and recover it. The security ramifications are much different. And talk to us a little bit about bearer versus non-bearer instruments in these environments.
Yes, I will go 20 seconds back in what you said to clarify that one of the important things is in preserving correctness, let's say, in the state of the world, is to ensure the atomicity of certain transactions. And by atomicity, we mean that either all the actions of a transaction succeed or none of them succeeds. Think about a debit and a credit. You are moving money from one bank account to another. You want both the debit and the credit to succeed. Otherwise, you either end up losing money or you end up creating duplicate money. This is the purpose of blockchain is to ensure atomicity typically with an eventual consistency problem. So eventually, when you are operating on a single chain, eventually all these actions get reflected. Here is where things get very difficult when you start talking about cross-chain. As long as all the actions of one's transaction, let's define the transaction as the unit of atomicity, which has the many sub-actions. As long as all of those actions are within a single blockchain, then that blockchain can ensure the atomicity, because you can submit either in a single transaction. And so you have two advantages. One is that all the actions that go into a single block are atomic because the increment is a block. And also you have the sense of time because block 53 comes before block 54 as you are creating the chain. Things become more difficult if you are now talking about actions that straddle multiple chains, because in that case, you don't have a single block into which you can put all the actions of your transaction. Different actions will go onto different blocks on different blockchains, and you do not even have a common sense of time in the sense of sequence that block 53 comes before block 54. Different numbering, asynchronous operation across the two blockchains. So whenever you need to exchange assets, as you said, if it is, so now the assets that you may want to exchange, and you say, I'm on blockchain A, I'm going to give you token X, and I'm going to receive from you token Y on blockchain B, right? In that case, we need to make sure that either both succeeds or none succeeds. If token A is a native token and the other is a wrap token, that's a bridge. Otherwise, we may have an exchange if they are both native tokens of different kinds. The problem is, and that's exactly where the atomicity needs to straddle multiple blockchains, that creates the attack vector that you mentioned, Pat. And this is exactly where we have seen a lot of the hacks and a lot of the problems in real life. And the risk, there are two ways to address the problem. One is to prevent it in the first place. And we can talk later about how we can use, for example, various protocols, including Accumulate, to ensure atomicity across actions from different blockchains. But then we can also reduce risk by having remedial actions. And the remedial actions, in the case of a bearer instrument, it is very difficult, because there you hold the instrument, you hold the token, that's it. Its possession is everything, right? In the case of non-bearer instruments, as would be the case, for example, with a tokenized security, then you can go to the transfer agent or the issuer and say, well, this was inappropriately moved or inappropriately exchanged. Please go back, cancel that token, and reissue a new one to its legitimate owner.
That's very good. And I think we went maybe even a little bit heavy on that, but everything you said was perfect. But just real quick, in 1 minute, give us the difference between permissioned and non-permissioned.
Yes. So in a non-permissioned blockchain, and people are very familiar with the chains like Ethereum, for example, everybody can write on the blockchain. In a permissioned blockchain, the entities that can write, the users who can write on the blockchain are controlled. There is a little bit like, let's say, a proof of authority there. So there are pros and cons. One creates a much bigger market. the other reduces the number of entities that can write off the blockchain, but it creates this also kind of filtering, which sometimes makes people feel more safe. But later, maybe in the conversation, we should explain that there are now technologies that allow the benefits of private blockchains to appear on public blockchains, and I think that's an area where people from DeFi Devs can give us an explanation of how they can manage mini blockchains on a public blockchain.
Yeah, and I think that that's important. And right now, the Federal Reserve and Gensler and the OCC are very much pushing the permissioned blockchains for any banking institution. But this DeFi, crypto, digital native world has exploded in the permissionless chains, right? And you've had large communities be developed, right, where you have over 300,000 developers building apps in an open source environment on Ethereum, right? And that's one of these benefits of the viral nature or the communities that are surrounding these trustless chains that are more open. They are more egalitarian to where anybody can participate in the market. And so there are pros and cons on both, but we need to understand that there's a market dynamic that, boy, these public chains have really grown communities around them, and they've grown an ecosystem. And Dan, I'm going to go to you. Talk to us a minute about what you're doing and data, and as you look at the need for data to inform instruments, to trade them, to work with blockchain, how do you look at data and blockchain and that intersection, and tell us a little bit more about your fund?
Yeah, so the thesis that we operate on is that, as I was describing, there's a paradigm shift underway right now in which every company needs to become a data company. And that's being driven primarily by this expectation that all decisions should be made based on data right now. And that has pervaded every firm, every level of every company, and entire industries are changing in that vision. Predicate industries that we all are aware of that have gone through transitions like this are movie and TV streaming, where Netflix led the way in creating a studio that generated data-driven content and was able to rise through the ranks to the top 6 studios very, very quickly, where it was a closed system before. So that's an example of that having been done well. The example of an industry that has gone data-centric not well is the medical industry with electronic medical records and EMS. Everybody runs Epic right now, and everybody hates it. And it's a closed system, and and there's no interoperability. So it sort of begs the case for why it's a evidence for why interoperability needs to happen in different industries. Other industries that are currently going through that transition are industries like finance, which always does a great job of reinventing itself based on the availability of new technologies. And that's where we became very interested in blockchain tech alongside AI, and for its possibility to transform the industry. And in order to do so, we see the free flowing of data as crucial for the outcomes that we want to see in those industries: accessibility, democratized access, free flowing of information, and efficiency of markets. I mean, those are pillars of the financial system, and being able to run blockchain, it seems like a best fit solution for technology like blockchain. So the different features that are offered there. So that's how we focused on it.
And when you think about kind of big data and the source of the data and the ability to manipulate data for good or ill, right, and control data without attribution, without focus, and understanding origins, markets can be manipulated, right? And among many other things can be manipulated, right? In communications, et cetera. And so the ability to have an auditable, immutable trail connected to data that you can commute trust in data is really important in a multi-environment, and for the markets themselves to work about the conditions of the asset, right? Because when you have inefficiencies where people are making money by exploiting bridges between chains and bearer instruments, that's bad. When you have people exploiting designs of pools and DAOs and mechanisms, it is bad, when they're doing so in a negative way. Flip that coin over. If you don't do that, Dan, good. We lost you for a minute, but when we lost Dan.
There we go. I just had to trigger the motion sensor. Sorry about that.
No problem. So when when you do that, you evidence and you uncover the weakness, right, in that market, and you need to do it. But in the markets in general, when there is bad data, you can't have long only markets. You need to go long and short, because in that environment you have the ability to perfect the price on that asset, right, if there's equal access to the data, right? But when there's an inefficiency on data, the market may be efficient, but it can be wrong. Do you know what I mean? And it can be wrong for a long time if you're not connecting the data along with the value of the asset, et cetera. So we're with you 100% on the need for free flowing data, and utilizing the design of an open network to deliver data in a distributed environment where you have auditability, immutability, source of data, et cetera. Bob, you're in the business of building apps on the blockchain and utilizing the blockchain and making certain existing functions more efficient. So give us 2-3 minutes on your business and what you do and why are you using blockchain?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and it's what we're talking about here is really the essence of what's important to us, I think, as well. So, Verso, as I mentioned, is a transaction management platform for ecosystems. And what that means is when you have multiple companies that are working together to process a single transaction, like an order or a product return or some sort of recruiting request, whatever it may be, these different companies have to participate together in a quite an efficient way. And part of what we do is we allow that to happen through the portal, just through our rules and our assignments and our forms and workflow. So one of the major issues that's happened over the years, of course, is there's been an inability to trust each partner within that chain. And that trust is so important because without it, each one of these companies is spending a lot of time and money trying to verify those transactions, right? So part of what we're doing, we have a portal that's allowed that to occur where we process these orders across the supply chain, or in some cases, even we have a application that is helping a COVID test management company actually enroll subscribers for testing, as well as processing test kits and test solutions from their partners. And so those kinds of things are important to have that trust. Well, we haven't had that until we've really worked with Accumulate most recently, where we can establish some way of stamping those transactions and the data that Dan was talking about that's associated with those transactions, acknowledging that data and stamping it some way into the blockchain so we can refer back to it to verify that trust. And each one of those parties within that chain know they have a valid source of information. What that allows to happen is a significant decrease in the time and effort spent to validate those transactions. It increases its settlement process as well. So you see cash flow improved in certain situations, and you can meet compliance requirements. So one of the first things we did was built this audit module working with Accumulate, where we are passing based on certain triggers of information in those different transactions to the stamp within Accumulate. in the blockchain. So that is very attractive for us with a software product, and it's very attractive for a number of our customers. So we're really building some interest around doing that. There's a couple of areas as well that are just as important to us in the future, and that includes, distributed ID, because participants within that kind of transaction flow and ecosystem, you have to know who you are. There's a settlement process around claims such as warranty claims, which is also important. That has to rely on what we think would be some of the multi-chain requirements. So Accumulate has a number of features that's really is positioning us, I think, to have greater success. And I can talk more about those if we need it, but that's a little bit of rambling there, but that's kind of the highlight of why we're excited about how blockchain is really going to enable our Verso product to be even more attractive to the marketplace.
And there's an enormous number. Thank you, Bob. There's an enormous number of these chains that are out there that people are trying to say, which one should I use? How do I use them? What's the right advantage? Permission versus permissionless? Where do I go as I'm taking my business there? And single threading to one chain creates a single point of failure, right? And we have a large cautionary tale in the form of Symbiont recently, right, where some very large financial players invested an enormous amount of money writing onto a single code that only worked, where their business processes were written into a language that only worked on one chain. And when that chain went down, and by the way, many chains are going to go down into the future. We know that, right? As more chains go down in the future, how do we protect against that? How do we come up with a strategy on how to interface and utilize the communities that exist in a multi-chain world? How do we as businesses engage in this and think about it, right? And Mike, I'm going to go over to you, right? When we think about data, when we think about building in a multi-chain world, when we think about permission versus permissionless, talk to me about Accumulate and what you guys have built over at DeFi Devs, and that Accumulate is a blockchain that I think is a little bit. Well, I'll let you tell about it. What is it? And tell us about where you are as a company and what you guys have done, and how does that fit within this world that we're discussing?
Sure, absolutely. It's been a fascinating conversation, and I'm going to jump into that in a second. But I just keep thinking about, my background, ran a hedge fund in Chicago for 20 years, and everybody could trust what we used to call the timestamp of a CME. When the CME cleared a trade, everybody could trust that data because everybody trusted that common participant. And it kind of, listen to this term about moneticity, which I'd never heard before, Christos, reminded me of during the Trump election. It got so busy that the clearinghouse couldn't keep up with the data. So nobody in the marketplace knew their positions for about 72 hours. It was absolute bedlam because there was a single point of failure and it failed. It never happened before. But as we look out at private market assets, we see such an opportunity, because there's the key differentiator is the data, but you need to be able to credential and anchor that data, in a cryptographical guarantee that blockchain can offer. So, just wanted to give a little background there. But Kyle, talk about why is it important to have a cryptographical guarantee, or to have a timestamp from a public permission blockchain for something like private market assets? Why is that important? Maybe you could, and how does that fit in with what we've built at Accumulate, for Accumulate?
Yeah, sure. I would say that in general, it's really important to know where the data is coming from, especially when that data is coming from like a high value private market asset, for example. It's important to have basically the ability to audit that data, let's say in a blockchain like Bitcoin or Ethereum that people trust a lot more. And Accumulate does it very well by anchoring to multiple chains and anchoring what I can maybe describe a little bit later as identity state. That basically is where the data is coming from, who signed off on that data, when did they sign, the transaction payload itself, which we do all because we have a chain of chains architecture, which I can also get into a bit later on. But would you like me to maybe spend a minute or two describing basically what Accumulate is, what we built?
Yeah, I think that would be perfect. That'd be great.
Yeah, sure. No problem. So Accumulate is a universally interoperable blockchain. We specialize in the management and also organization of identity, security, and data across different systems. We enhance other blockchains, and we make it a lot easier for enterprises to add blockchain into their tech stack. Accumulate uses a delegated proof of stake for consensus. That's both secure and environmentally friendly. And our tokenomics relies on a dual token model that includes our native Acme token and also these non-tradable credits that have a fixed US dollar cost. And these basically allow enterprise clients to budget their expenses over a long period of time. And that's independent of market conditions. Our identities in Accumulate are human readable URLs as opposed to the hash-based addresses you might be familiar with on Bitcoin or other blockchains. And these URLs, they can be connected to or nested within each other, which basically allows you to create organizations on the blockchain that are as wide or as deep as you want. Our security is pretty unique as well. It's organized into a hierarchy that lets users do things like key rotation, key backup, or more complicated multi-sig. And a really neat feature is that when you combine our identity and security hierarchies together, you're able to create these complex access controls that really perform many of the same functions as smart contracts do, but without the need to actually have to write and deploy smart contracts. Although we are also able to do cross-chain smart contracts as well.
That's great, Pat.
And Kyle, thanks so much. And talk to me about how does an institution, a business, somebody building an app, somebody investing in businesses, a financial institution, how do they think about not only which chain to use, permissioned versus permissionless, particularly in geographies around the world, but then also how do they interact with multiple chains? How should they think about interaction? And what's the difference, right, between a layer one and a layer two? What's the value of this? And what problems were you solving? If people, how do they need to frame that decision making, that decision tree, and what problems were you solving as you were creating Accumulate?
Yeah, I would say at a very basic level, when people are looking for which blockchains to use, they want to have, of course, security. They want to have high throughput that can kind of scale as their business also grows. They also, I guess, increasingly want the ability to interoperate, not just with other blockchains, but with other companies that use blockchains, for example. They want to make sure that the transactions are low cost, that there's plenty of validators to make sure transactions are safe, basically. But to your point about kind of private versus public blockchains as well, that tends to be an either or type of thing. So blockchains can either be private or they can be public. But the way Accumulate is structured with this chain of chains architecture, you can do really interesting things like basically have a private chain that kind of anchors into a public chain. And the benefit of doing that is basically you can keep certain things private that you need. That could be data you want to keep private or who's participated in a certain transaction. But when you anchor that into a public chain, you basically get a public witness from that. So it could be a benefit of Accumulate to offer both the public and the private option. When it comes to things like costs, one issue for a lot of blockchains is that the price of their token is going to be dependent upon the market conditions. We have these bull bear market cycles like everyone is familiar with. And of course, running data to the blockchain is usually associated with some cost. And that cost, like I said, is variable due to conditions in the market. But for Accumulate, we have the ability to onboard clients' asset data, for example, with transaction cost stability. And that's because of our dual token model that, like I mentioned earlier, consists of our blockchain's native Acme token, which trades in the open market, and also non-tradable credits that have a fixed US dollar cost, but they're not legally considered a cryptocurrency or stable coins. So this system benefits companies because it allows them to budget their expenses over a long period of time. Basically, you just have to estimate your transactions over some period of time, calculate your expenses, and then buy as many credits as you need. So you can imagine an application where you have, let's say, an IoT network, and there's going to be some regular, cadence of writing transactions, to the blockchain. So you know how many transactions you have, you know how many IoT devices you have, and our cost of writing data is always going to be the same. And I'm getting a bit, over time here, but just one last thing I want to mention as well is just our key management ability, which is very sophisticated on Accumulate. So basically, we allow people to change credentials or permissions on an as-needed basis. This key management could reflect employees being hired, fired, or leaving the company, or maybe getting promoted or moved to different departments. I think most blockchains tend to be inflexible, which makes it really hard to deal with everyday changes that a company experiences. But we have this dynamic identity architecture and security architecture that you can combine to build access controls that don't really exist on other blockchains. So just quick examples, we can do things like whitelist identities. We can pretty soon be able to allow only credentialed people to make or view changes to the data behind an asset. Sphereon is currently working on adding the IDs to Accumulate. We can blacklist transaction types to allow certain identities to initiate transactions above a certain amount or update their keys. So, those features are all, I think, important to businesses. They exist to some extent on other blockchains, but I feel like Accumulate provides most of those, or I guess really all of those benefits in a really intuitive way to kind of write data and organize identities.
So thanks, Kyle. And I'm going to sum that up. It is a mechanism you can use to work with many different chains, interoperate, use the benefits of multiple chains, and do that. And Quentin, I'm going to get to you in just a second, but I want to throw it to Christos for one more comment. And Christos, from my standpoint, as we think about interoperability, Kyle was talking about interoperability not only with chains, but interoperability between mechanisms and systems and mechanisms of identification and key management, et cetera. Talk to me about interoperability broadly, and I think you also had a comment that you want to make.
Yes, and it was actually the comment. I wanted to go exactly where you're going, Pat, and I wanted to tie together a couple of things. Something that you said earlier about, I think you mentioned Gensler and some kind of preference towards permission blockchains, right? And one of the things that I would like to highlight from all of the features that Kyle mentioned about Accumulate is the fact that Accumulate was built from the beginning with signatures and identities being first-class objects. That's a computer science term. That means the blockchain handles signatures. In other blockchains, you have wallets, and then a signature is just a byproduct of a wallet. It's an ancillary thing. It's an incidental. What this does is it allows one to construct arbitrary structures of governance of subchains. So as Kyle was saying that Accumulate is a chain of chains, you could have a subchain within Accumulate behave in a certain way. And if one reads the very recent proposal from the Securities and Exchange Commission, one of the reasons they seem to believe that permission blockchains, have a certain positive property is that one can reverse transactions without having to resort to everybody who is agreeing the entire network, the entire blockchain. Accumulate solves that problem by creating intermediate layers of governance where you can have a subchain, and that can be managed by a group of entities smaller than all the other entities. So going back now to the go ahead, Pat. Yeah.
I want to make a fine point here. When you say arbitrary, that does not mean random.
Not random.
Arbitrary is chosen. Arbitrary
means chosen. I choose and I.
Yeah, but from a computer science standpoint, means can be designed in any manner possible that as created by the person who's utilizing it meaning it's not templatized,
Exactly.
right? Versus it's not random.
Not random, and it's not. Sometimes people conflate the two terms. No.
Yeah.
And if I tell you choose an arbitrary number, that's a number to you are liking. It's a number that you choose, not a random number which you don't know what it's going to be.
Correct. Yeah.
It's a very important distinction. Yes.
Yeah. So I wanted to thank you for those comments. And I'm actually going to throw the interoperability question to Quentin. Thanks for waiting here so long, brother. Talk to us a little bit about interoperability. Why does that matter to companies? Why does that matter to markets? Why does that matter to investors, that interoperability be real, and not just between chains, but between systems, in all sorts of different things? Talk to us about interoperability. How big of a deal is it in the development of markets, and kind of where do you sit as you think about this as a product manager in the need to give people optionality?
Absolutely. And, you know, going back to one of the things you said in the beginning of this conversation is a lot of these blockchains are built with specific use cases in mind. So we think about, you know, the first blockchain, Bitcoin. You know, Bitcoin was particularly made for a payments use case, which has gravitated towards a digital gold use case, or, you know, store of value use case over time. And then you have Ethereum, which is more for decentralized application building. Accumulate is more for data focused and enterprise focused use cases, but in, you know, the guise of interoperability, the Accumulate protocol is specifically designed to allow that interoperability with all these blockchains that are built with specific use cases in mind. And so Accumulate is really designed to allow you to, you know, use the blockchain that you need to for the particular use case you want to support, while being able to tie that into whichever other chain you're using for the other use case. And so on that, you know, to that purpose, Accumulate can actually support multiple key standards. So if you have an Ethereum key, you can actually use that in Accumulate. If you have a Bitcoin key, you can use that in Accumulate. And what that allows Accumulate to do is actually be the key manager for whatever blockchain you're using. And so
if I'm native and I've built a ton of stuff that's native to Ethereum, and I'm managing, and I've already built my systems and my controls, and I'm doing that, yet my counterparty has done something the same on another system, Accumulate can be that interface that we can work back and forth between. Is that right? In kind of a key management function?
Absolutely. Yeah. That key you can ask anyone on the key management is by far my favorite feature of Accumulate, because it allows you to have that interoperability. And, you know, just to add to that, it's particularly designed with an enterprise focus. So, you know, one of the things that other blockchains really aren't good at is permission-based access or class-based access or any sort of access controls. You know, you have one key that controls all your assets, everything you're doing. And with Accumulate, you can set up your account to represent your organization, and you can have multiple keys stored by multiple people actually controlling that account. And if you had an employee, let's say, that was terminated or transferred, you can actually revoke access to that employee's key. And so that really allows you to, one, actually conduct business the way you would on the real world, but on chain. And two, it allows you this interoperability functionality where you're able to actually transfer assets using Accumulate as the bridge layer.
Dan, as you think about this as an investor, right? How big is interoperability? How much, when you're investing in a company and it has the ability to reach into multiple communities, reach into multiple chains, how much does that matter when you're making an investment decision? What does optionality mean to you as far as the development of the company and you know, venues, communities, chains that are open, particularly, you know, in your own niche of data and that data-centric world?
Well, it's huge. I mean, we all recognize that the adoption curve for blockchain is is still we're at a low point on the adoption curve. And the one thing that there are a few items that are standing in the way of full on 90% adoption, and there are a few crucial places that we need to achieve in order to rise along that curve. And one of them is interoperability, and that democratized access and ability for or ease of access for anyone and their grandparents to be able to access and understand what they're looking at is huge. And that's the first thing. And then the second is in order to create a marketplace in which you can build thickness on all sides of it. That's it's crucial for the ability for anybody to be able to access it, and that only happens with interoperability. I think the predicate examples for markets or areas in which we haven't done that well are warnings that we shouldn't be investing behind in blockchain. So, for example, a lack of interoperability across games, video games, is a good evidence for the direction that blockchain shouldn't be going. I think the walled garden approach is not ideal for what the industry can grow to achieve, and so in order to minimize the hindrances for that achievement, for that mass adoption of blockchain, there needs to be. I mean, it's absolutely critical for all chains to be interoperable. So,
and this evolution of the technology, where innovation can get stranded in a very small community, right? That doesn't have the ability to port over. And I'll give an example of Hedera Hashgraph, right? Hedera had some great technology that they had built that people were building on top of, but they were stranded because their mechanism of interface was so unique. No other chain could really do it. And they have really exploded once they created their connector, and the EVM community could really engage with Hedera and their unique technologies. And I think the ability for innovation and real innovation that adds enormous value can get stranded and die, right, from a lack of oxygen when it's locked away from where the businesses exist. Does that make sense? And saying, I have the best technology, everybody come to me, versus having the technology and then being able to go reach where the markets are. So Dan, could not agree with you more. And I think I'm going to just ask a basic question, and I'll open it up. Maybe Bob asked you to start, but that ask of everybody on this webinar. Talk to me about the idea of the majority. There in the blockchain days, a lot of people were saying how the majority of the value in the internet went to the applications, right? And what they tried to do was say, we're going to push more of this value down to the chains, and that was the creators of the chains who were doing this. Are there going to be single chains that people are going to go to, or do you think interoperability is going to be the way everybody goes, right? As an enterprise, as a business, as ecosystems, right? Are they going to connect to a single chain? Are they going to seek interoperability? How big a deal is interoperability?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a combination, right, of the applications and blockchain. I think that's really the hopefully the solution to the market, is that you have value-add applications that can control a lot of the information and the flow, with a foundation offered by the blockchain that can support some of the things we've been talking about. Now, I do think interoperability is absolutely key, because we'll have clients that may already have smart contracts on Ethereum or doing business somewhere else on a particular blockchain. And a lot of those clients really don't care or want to know some of the the science behind blockchain. They just want to see that their problems are solved, and that this works. So I think it's going to be the applications like with Verso, coupled with a strong multi-chain solution such as Accumulate, with some of the things that Quentin and Kyle talked about, where we integrate, couple that together in a very tight way, and we can mediate across these blockchains depending on where they already are or what's needed to solve those particular business problems. So for us, we're very focused on what the business needs. And so that's why we need some sort of foundational blockchain architecture that can help solve that. So I think interoperability is key. And that's why, again, we're excited about our partnership with Accumulate.
Fantastic. Hey, talk to me. Anybody else weigh in? Go ahead, Dan. You were going to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we are at an equivalent stage to where the internet was in like 1991, where people could access different aspects of the internet with bulletin boards and through text-based interface that required a lot of prior knowledge on how to really send messages across those bulletin boards, and it wasn't until a few key processes were achieved that the purview was blasted wide open, and everybody was accessing one internet, and that's the equivalent example to me of where of how people will access blockchain in the future. I think that it will be one meta chain that is across multiple singular chains that people will switch between. So I think that it's going to go a similar way as the internet did.
And if I could just add one thing, I'm just kind of chuckling about it, but I remember a couple of years ago, I wanted to, during the NFT craze, I thought I'm going to go buy an NFT just because everybody's doing it. And so I had a little bit of Ethereum lying around. I wanted to buy this NFT for $100. And then the shipping costs were going to be $2,000 on Ethereum. But I couldn't, it was Ethereum only. So I couldn't get off, and I thought to myself, we're in this terribly inefficient period of blockchain. And, as a believer in markets will sort that out. And markets will pick the solutions that make the most sense based on economics and speed and other things over time. And it's not a criticism of Ethereum, which is an amazing network, but there's these vast inefficiencies that exist today. And I'm just confident that over time, coordinated markets will win out, and there'll be far greater efficiencies in the years ahead.
And if we think about that, right, Ethereum has built this wonderful community and tool set and incentive structure that apps can be built and utilized, and these enormous sets of libraries. But the reality is a lot of that good work can get stuck if you don't have the ability to move what's been built at scale, with speed, with transparency, with controls that may not function in a Ethereum world, but might in an EVM world, or might in a multi-chain world, where that intermediate layer that creates interoperability is going to unlock that innovation, Dan, right, as you talked about. And we agree with that completely. We have about 6 minutes left in this call or webinar, and what I'd like to do is just kind of go around the horn real quick and give everybody kind of one final word if we can. And so, Kyle, talk to us as we think about multi-chain or cross-chain world that's going to come. What's going to bring that about, and what's it going to deliver?
Mm-hmm. I think also kind of building upon the last question as well about interoperability and single blockchain versus a multi-chain future. I do agree with Bob and Dan and you as well, Pat, that there's going to be many blockchains that are going to continue to exist. Different blockchains do different things better than others. Some are faster, some are more scalable. Some are easier to organize. But with Accumulate, we kind of like how DNS acts like a phone book of the internet. We can tie multiple blockchains together into a single internet of blockchains. And I think this ability to kind of act as a meta chain is going to be, really important going forward. For Accumulate, we try to be compatible with different security standards like Quentin alluded to earlier. That refers to different security algorithms, lift occurs, hash functions that make it a lot more interoperable with other blockchains. Basically with Accumulate, there's no need really to put sensitive documents on Ethereum because of security or write environmental IoT data to Solana because of the low cost and high throughput, or store references to all these hashes on, let's say, Amazon's QLDB to kind of track your data on many different blockchains. Instead, you can put it all in Accumulate, managed by, let's say, a company's digital identity, with separate data accounts for organizing different data streams, but you can still anchor into all these different blockchains and get their utility as well. So I think the ability to interoperate with other blockchains and to basically use their best features is going to be an important way forward.
Thank you for that. Quentin, let me throw it to you, brother.
Sure. I'd like to take my last thought to focus just back on the permission versus permissionless chain concept. Now, we're always going to have a need for permission chains because there are just certain benefits around the privacy that you don't get from permissionless chains. But with permissionless chains, there are security benefits that you really can't get on those permission chains and longevity benefits. And so I think what we'll really see in the future through the utilities such as Accumulate's ability to actually permission chains within its chain of chains architecture, we'll really see this more interoperability between the permissioned and the permissionless chains. And I think that's going to open up a lot of use cases when we're now allowing enterprises who really need that permissioned setup for their use case because of regulations, because of privacy needs, but being able to take advantage of the larger permissionless world. I think we're really going to start seeing a lot of crossovers between the two, and a lot of opportunities arise from that.
Wonderful. Michael?
I would just add, fortunate to be around such a great team, and I kind of, when we started this project, I thought we'd be focused in one area, financial services or private market data. And I've realized that, the applications of blockchain are run the gamut. And, we've seen traffic on the network from large government agencies doing things unrelated to finance. We're seeing some of the most well-known, or one of the most well-known hospitals in America is involved with Accumulate. And so for trial data, and we're seeing the applications of blockchain aren't specific to one industry. They're applicable to all industries in different ways and in shapes and forms. So it's just terribly exciting, and it's fun to see the protocol grow.
Bob?
Yeah, nothing much more other than to add to what Michael and Quentin were talking about. I think, now the fun begins, for those of us that have limited knowledge about the science of blockchain, and appreciate the patience from this team in dealing with us, is the business and what problems are we solving from a business and product perspective. And we're starting to see that now. And I think that's so important. And having a solution like Accumulate that can do some of those things to help us solve those very specific problems, to me, that's what's exciting. So it's a good time to be working with blockchain.
Yeah, and this answers the question that came up in the feed. Please talk about commercial adoption. And I think that as we moved away from this period where we had everything was focused on the blockchain, and now we're building the applications, and the value is going to be shared equally with the application in this multi-chain environment, right? Well, Bob, what you're talking about. Dan, talk to me. Give us your final thoughts.
Yeah, I think anybody, if they take a step back and ask themselves, do you see blockchain technology as a bigger part of our lives 10 years from now, or a smaller part of our lives? I think that invariably everyone would see that it's going to be a bigger part. And it's just a thrill to be on board with a journey that you guys are pushing the boundaries of what those outcomes could look like. And so I'm just happy to be on a panel with such heavy hitters with you guys.
Hey, Dan, thank you, buddy. Christos, I'm gonna give you the second to last word because I'll reserve the last word for myself. But give us your final thoughts, buddy.
When I came to the US in the late 80s, take the ATM network. There were, I believe, at least two, and you had to look at your ATM card and see, does it work with the red network or the blue network and so on. That is not something that people do anymore, right? So I think that's what people expect for the future, for all the blockchains. People will expect applications to interoperate seamlessly across blockchains. Now, there is a lot of work that needs to happen in the background, and ideally we should make it transparent to the users. But at the same time, we need to pay attention to the fact that the strength of a chain is only limited by its weakest link. And we need to, and it makes very little sense to have very, very strong individual blockchains and then have a weak way to couple them. And I think this is where having something which ensures that you get the strength of a blockchain to work across other chains without losing the strength of a blockchain. And I think that's something where Accumulate can help. That would be, I think, a very strong, it's a very strong element.
What a fantastic analogy of the ATM network. It's a perfect one. Christos, thank you. I want to thank all of you here. And I want to give a special shout out to Kyle. I'm going to tell a quick story. When I was friends with the chief market strategist for one of the big global banks, and he was the keynote speaker at an event, a very high profile event, and they touted his talk, whatever. And he was enough of a personality that when he went and he showed up, the person who was announcing or who was introducing him read the entire introduction, and then he said, my friend got up and he said, so I know I'm supposed to speak on this, but I don't care about this. So let me tell you what I'm going to talk about. And then he just spoke on whatever he felt like, right? And so when I threw that question to Kyle and he goes, Pat, thanks so much, but I'm going to really answer the previous question, not what you asked me. So Kyle, you get the shout out for answering whatever question you felt like, not what I asked. So great job, brother. Great to have everybody here. And we appreciate all of you who are watching. Continue to engage with us through our social media. And if you want to reach out to any of these people individually, Inveniam's happy to facilitate that. God bless, guys. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Pat.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks, everyone.
A lot of fun.